Boom! Living in Deck Tech. This is the new streamlined version, the new clean version that I'm playing at GP San Antonio tomorrow with my teammates Morgan on Merfolk and Adam Yurchik on Affinity. Welcome in, much love, Trav here. And this deck's super special to me. Really, Living End got it all started for me. My first GP top 8 in 2010. And it was a new brew at the time. It was crazy. It was out of left field, and it's so much fun for me to be able to play this in a tournament. What is it, 6-7 years later, and see how much my life has changed, and how much the deck has changed, and how I could have played this version at that first tournament, but it didn't make sense. But the deck has evolved in so many ways, and think about all the people that I've met who have played this deck or played against this deck. Again, I don't want to take all the credit. It's a pretty obvious deck that a lot of people were starting to come to at that time. But I think about how this deck for me is how it's possible that everyone can overlook something. Like Death Shadow at this tournament. Everyone overlooked Death Shadow for 7 years, and turns out that it's just good without any new printings. Living End was overlooked for a very long time, and it's still good, and it's good for this tournament, so we'll see how it goes. I'll have an update. Hopefully I do well, hopefully I win, but yeah, before the list itself, I was assigned to, part of dividing for a modern unified team event is everyone, yeah, we'll get to the Captured Sunlight. Everyone, it's important for modern that everyone's excited about their deck so they can practice a lot. So it's like, what are people excited about? Well, I didn't want to start with Living End because that would be forcing it maybe. I want to sacrifice for the team. I'll start volunteer to try out the Shadow thing. I did very poorly with Shadow to start, and then I 5-0'd my first competitive league with the Living End. It's like, yes, this is the deck. We've come full circle, and I believe it's good again. And it's good for a lot of reasons. And again, I just want to share with you that feeling that it's possible you can discover something everyone has overlooked. It is possible. It gets rare in Magic, but it's always possible. So for those who want to brew and look under stones for some missing gem, this is proof of that. So once I knew, also there's a guy, Jody Keith, who won a small SCG event right around that time. And I was like, wait a minute, maybe Living End is uniquely well positioned again. So I started playing it, but I ran into some problems against various sorts of decks, which led me to this version. I call this Streamlined Living End because Living End is a deck that you have lands, you have cyclers, you have cascaders. I play more cyclers, more cascaders than anyone, and we care about the graveyard, so I care about the graveyard, and that's the deck. And the sideboard is incredibly streamlined. There's nothing very fancy about this, but there is some high-tech stuff. So let's start by talking about Captured Sunlight. Captured Sunlight, see if we can catch the light on this. Yeah, there we go. Captured Sunlight, Cascade, you gain 4 life. 2 green, white. So I've talked about how Living End works so many times, but the basic primer is you have lands, you have cyclers, you cascade into Living End. Living End destroys all of their creatures, returns all your creatures to the battlefield. So common game is cycle, 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 violent outburst, cascade into Living End, destroy all your things, everything comes into play. That's how the deck works. Usually, the stock versions, you play only Outburst and Demonic Dread. That's all I ever played before, but I felt like for this tournament, I really want an extra Cascader, and the life gain is good. And there's sacrifices to be made for playing this. In order for Captured Sunlight to always end in Living End, I have to cut everything that costs 3, which some of those cards are sacred. Cut Simian Spirit Guide, cut Fairy Macabre, which I never really liked anyways, cut Fulminator Mage for Captured Sunlight. Fulminator Mage is a vestigial card. It is a legacy card. It is a card that you wouldn't start in the deck, in the main deck nowadays, but you started with this. We started with it to beat Dark Depths, Hexmage Depths. So we started with 4 Fulminator Mages in the deck, but Hexmage Depths is not very popular. You don't want Fulminator versus Death Shadow. They're too fast. You don't want Fulminator versus Affinity. Well, it's okay. You don't really want Fulminator versus Bantrazi. Honestly, they've already deployed everything by then. You don't want Fulminator Mage versus Merfolk. You don't want Fulminator Mage versus a lot of the fair decks. it's a sideboard card for Tron, it's a sideboard card for Valakut. It's a nice cheese thing, but at this point, the biggest problem with the deck is the rise of discard. There's so many Thoughtseize, there's so many Inquisition of Kozilek. They will take your one Violent and take your one Demonic Dread, and you'll be on top decks. Playing for top decks is not very fun. I would rather max out on 12 and play a card, Captured Sunlight, that cannot be taken with Inquisition of Kozilek. You cannot Inquisition this. If you want to Thoughtseize me, good luck trying to beat me that way. And even versus Bant Eldrazi and Tron is playing Thought Knot Seer now. They're coming after your hand, and the easiest way that a deck like Bant Eldrazi is going to beat you is they take your one Cascader and you don't draw another one. It's not because you didn't have Fulminator to prevent their follow-up, because usually versus those decks, you Living End and the game's over. After this tournament, Captured Sunlight might go to the sideboard, but Captured Sunlight is an amazing sideboard card versus discard decks of all kinds, and I'll probably will always play this in my sideboard from here on forth. Although you're going to have to cut Fulminators, you're going to have to cut Simians, you're going to have to side out Blood Moons when you do that. But again, versus most discard decks, right now, the Death Shadow is too fast for you to blow up their lands. Also, slight metagame versus Death Shadow. 4 Groves. Grove lets you manipulate their life total, so you can put them to 13. I've had a lot of Death Shadow players start with a Death Shadow on 12, and then you put them to 13, they put it in the bin. It takes a lot of pressure off you, and they have to rely on their other threats. Also, I'm playing 4 Blackcleave Cliffs, which is a nice pain-free land. I want my lands to come into play untapped and be pain-free. I play this as a control deck and a combo deck. Blackcleave Cliffs is not a swamp. A lot of people are playing Street Wraith, and you don't want to have swamp in play for people to swamp walk over. So 4 of these as well. So we have the 12 Cascaders, gives us tons of redundancy. You're never going to be short on Cascade, or rarely will be. Captured is also nice because those of you who are experts with this deck, you know Demonic Dread has to have a target to be cast. And you could play a Dryad Arbor to fetch to try to fix that, but alternatively you could just side out the Demonic Dreads, and now you have Captured and Outburst, and you're always going to hit. So that's a nice little trick too. Let's move to the ley lines. I mained Leyline at Pro Tour Amsterdam, and they're good. It's always been in my back pocket. It makes a lot of sense right now, and just in a streamlined version. It exiles the Street Wraiths. It exiles, makes Glyph small if you start with a Leyline and a Grove. Glyph/Tasigur, Gurmag is shut off, and Snapcaster is shut off, and Death Shadow is shut off. They have no threats, and it becomes very easy to win. They can't discard you out. You're going to beat Death Shadow a good amount of the time because of that. Leyline is good versus Affinity. It shuts down Ravager. Leyline is fine versus any fair deck where you want to cast this multiple times. If they cast a Scavenging Ooze, you Living End once, you're going to want to Living End again. Leyline makes your bad matchups good. With 4 Leylines, you're a favorite to beat Dredge. You're a favorite to beat Ironworks, like Eggs combo. You're a favorite to beat Storm, which all used to be bad matchups without Leyline. So 4 of those is great. And again, this deck can just use it because we care about their graveyard. Red-green Primeval Titan decks might start by discarding a Primeval Titan. You want to shut that line off. Leyline also is a fine hard cast. And we can't play Fairy Macabre if we're playing Captured Sunlight. Leyline is a fine hard cast on turn 4, often is good enough versus Tron. If you have survived versus Affinity, you can cast it. Well, you made some spiders come out, you can cast it and then continue on. So it's a reasonable hard cast. It's not that bad a top deck. Cycling. We'll talk about the mana base after that, and then the sideboard. 4 Architects, 4 Deadshot, 4 Monsters, 4 Street Wraith, 3 Recluse, 3 Twisted. I see a lot of people trim these. Don't do it. Living End is not good without cycling. It's what gives you the consistency. It makes your Living Ends more powerful. Very, very nice. Most people play Deadshot, Monstrous, Street Wraith. I see a lot of people cutting on land cyclers. I don't recommend doing that. One of the reasons why this deck is so good is because you're so good at hitting your lands to execute your Plan B. By the way, Plan B is going to get better when the new set comes out because they're putting out some rare creatures at cycling, which will go into this deck. I'm not sure where they'll fit, but these always let you hit your turn 3 and 4, so very, very important. I don't see a lot of people play Architects of Will. I was convinced to play this by Michael Hetrick, ship at Holla, Pro Tour Valencia about 6 years ago. Just like, yo, play more cyclers. That's what the deck does. This one dies to lightning bolt, okay, but the ability, when it comes into play, you look at the top 3 cards of a player's deck and rearrange them is actually very, very nice. So that's why I think the deck is Streamlined Living End. We have 4, 8, 12, 16, 22 cyclers, 12 cascaders, 4 ways to hit on the graveyard, and lands. We've got the Groves and the Cliffs, which are just good lands in this deck and hit on Death Shadow. Verdants, a Plains, a Forest, and a Swamp to get untapped from these, and to play our Blood Moons, which we'll get to. And I'm playing these lands. Stomping Ground, Blood Crypt, and Overgrown Tomb are required. I'm playing Godless Shrine. Obviously, we want white to cast Captured and even Pale Recluse. And I really want the Plains because you want untapped in the Captured, gives you a lot of life. It's really nice. I'm not playing Temple Garden. It would be good. There's sometimes you want to play it, but it's not necessary. I'm not sure where to fit it. I'm also not playing a Breeding Pool, which I'd like to cast Architects. But I side out Architects. It's one of the most common cards to side out. I know you said don't trim, but I never go below 12. I never go below 18 of these cyclers. So that's the main. I like the matchups versus Shadow. I like the matchup versus Affinity. I like the matchup versus Bantrazi. I'm excited to play against Dredge, Storm. I am not a Merfolk, Elves. I'm not excited to play against Ad Nauseam, Pure Steel Paladin combo, or Burn. And I'm giving up my game 1 against the land decks at the cost of having a much better game against, being more consistent against everything else. That's why we sideboard. So let's move to the sideboard here. 4 Fulminators. It's amazing when it's amazing. Especially, it's the best card against Tron. It's generally going to come back. But Blood Moon is also very good. Blood Moon shits on Bantrazi. Blood Moon is better than Fulminator by far against Valakut decks, because Blood Moon shuts off their Valakut. They can't win if this thing is in play, which makes a huge difference. So I've got 7 of these. This 4th Captured, by the way, you could play one of the extra lands here. Or you could play a Kessig, or you could play a Vault of the Archangel, or you could play an Avalanche Riders, you could play a Jungle Weaver, you can make room for Archfiends of Ephins or whatever. So I have the 7 anti-land cards. Fulminator will also, I'll bring in some of these versus Affinity and Infect to take down Nexuses. And then, so for this sideboard, I just wanted to be sure that I would use every card. I could play a card like Slaughter Games to try to shore up Ad Nauseam, but it's very unlikely I play against it. So why don't I just play cards I know I'm going to use? I know these Blood Moons and Fulminators are going to get used. They have to. There's so many decks that they're good against. I know these Shriekmaws are going to get used. Okay, Merfolk and Elves are already good matchups, and Bantrazi are already good matchups. I don't care. I want to make them better. I want to win through Rest in Peace by casting Shriekmaws. I know 4 are going to get used. I know 4 Chewers are going to get used. I'll bring in 4 against Affinity. I'll bring in 4 against Tron. I'll bring in 4 against Eldrazi Tron. I'll bring in 4 against Bridge. I know every sideboard card will get used. I wouldn't mind having another card versus Burn, another card versus Ad Nauseam, but those matchups are already bad. I'm not necessarily interested in trying to win every single match in Modern when there's 50 decks, especially if it means putting in cards in my sideboard that'll probably never get used. So that's the deck. I'm going to follow up with an update to let you know how I did in the tournament. Again, there's 3 of us on the team, so we all depend on each other. Hopefully I am one of the carries and not the anchor. You never know how it breaks. In Modern, it's a pretty random format. My lifetime is like 60% in 65 in Grand Prix 60. It's not my best format, and it's hard to have an amazing edge. I really like this deck. It's really tech versus the meta, and it's so streamlined. It's very consistent. Has an amazing sideboard that's always going to get used. So that's the deck. We'll see how I feel after the tournament's over, but I could easily see the main thing we've been debating is should it be the Fulminators or the Captureds that are main. The Leyline to me stays in the deck now. It's just too good in this deck, and Architects stay, and Grove and Blackcleave are great. And I know people cut the Shriek Maws and Chewers. I just wouldn't do it. They will get used. They will serve you well. And Blood Moon, amazing card as well. Simeon, I don't miss. I didn't play it for the longest time. Simeon is really at its best versus blue counter decks that play Mana Leak, because you can kind of surprise them. No one's playing that anymore. You're generally not in it for speed. You don't want a Living End turn 2, so what's the point? You don't need that card. Fairy Macabre as well is not nearly as powerful as Leyline. You have 4 Leylines, you're a favorite to beat Dredge in a match. You have 4 Fairy Macabres, you're still not a favorite to beat Dredge. You have 4 Fairy Macabres, you're not a favorite to beat Storm. You have 4 Leylines. I've had 1 Leyline versus 4 Macabres in the mirror match, and the 1 Leyline came out victorious over 4 Macabres. So to me, this is way better than Macabre. It's been better. And again, check this out. One possible alteration, which is metagame, but I really, really like the 75, is the captureds for the Fulminators. One other key thing that I tested and talked a little bit about, but not for this tournament. You don't have to play 60 cards in Living End. You hate drawing Living End because you draw a dead card, and also because it depletes it from your deck. If you play more cards, especially with so much land fetching, you have more lands you can fetch, like Dryad Arbor, like the Temple Garden, like the Breeding Pool, and you're going to draw Living End less. So if you're going to play like J-Way 66 cards, add 4 Jungle Weavers, cut nothing, would be the deck to do it, except for Leyline. To me, you always want Leyline. Like, the Cascaders are kind of interchangeable, and the Cyclers are interchangeable, and the lands are... Well, there's only one Leyline, and you want it in your opening hand all the time, so that's... if... Living End tends to be a good deck, but you can always change it based on what's going on, and with the heavy discard meta right now, this makes the most sense to me. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope this inspires you to go out and tinker and toy and try to come up with something new, whether that's Magic or just contributing to society in some better way, honestly. So it's a sweet deck, and I recommend it to Living End players, and I hope that if you take one thing from this, it's possible that a million people overlook something that is going to work great, and you can come up with some new idea that will do well for you and for others. So much love, shout out to all the Living End players. Thank you, and if you play this deck and it serves you well, let me know how it goes. I always like feedback on how different versions work. So I will follow up with a tournament recap in the next couple days, or maybe it's already up. So stay tuned for that. Should be a good one, and take care.